All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to dig into something that might be a little unnerving for some homeowners out there, especially those of us in Knoxville. We're talking termites. And we're going deep into some material from Critter Wranglers, a company that deals with these little menaces, to find out just how serious of a problem they are and what you can do about them.
It's interesting, when you think about pests, your mind often goes to the obvious ones, the ants crawling around or a spider you find in the corner. But these termites, well, they like to stay hidden. And Critter Wranglers really drives this point home. They call them silent destroyers. And they're not exaggerating. These things cause billions of dollars in property damage every year in the U.S.
Billions, yeah. It's mind-boggling how something so small can cause so much damage, especially here in Knoxville. And what's really scary is how they do it. Critter Wranglers uses this phrase. They say they eat your home from the inside out. That's a pretty vivid image, and I think it gets to the core of why termites are so much worse than your average pest.
Yeah, and they don't just nibble at the edges either. These termites, they're like tiny little excavators creating tunnels and weakening the whole structure of your house. And what's really sneaky is that unlike some other wood-boring insects like carpenter ants, which leave behind that telltale sawdust, termites actually consume the cellulose inside the wood. So you might have a piece of wood that looks perfectly fine on the outside, but has actually been hollowed out from within. That's why it's so hard to catch them early.
That's a pretty terrifying thought. Your house slowly being eaten away from the inside without you even realizing it. It's enough to make any homeowner lose sleep.
Now, we've talked on this show before about some common household pests that you can maybe handle yourself, but termites seem to be in a different category altogether. Critter Wranglers is pretty adamant that this isn't a do-it-yourself situation. Why is that? It really comes down to the scale of the problem. Termite colonies can be absolutely massive. We're talking hundreds of thousands, even millions of individual termites. And since they're subterranean, meaning they live underground, it's incredibly difficult to get to them with just some store-bought spray or traps. To really eliminate a colony, you need to target the entire thing, which is usually buried deep underground. And that's just not something that your average homeowner can tackle with DIY methods.
So what you're saying is if you live in Knoxville and you've got termites, you really need to call in the professionals. And that's exactly where Critter Wranglers comes in, right? They specialize in both getting rid of existing infestations and preventing new ones.
Exactly. And it's important to be clear here, we're specifically talking about subterranean termites. They're the main type that causes trouble in Knoxville. They build these massive underground colonies and then construct these tunnels, they actually call them mud tubes, to travel above ground and reach their food sources, which unfortunately is often the wood in our homes. So if you see those mud tubes, it's a sure sign that you've got a termite problem.
All right, so those mud tubes, they're kind of like the red flag.
Yeah.
Right? And if you see them, you know it's time to call the experts. So let's say you call Critter Wranglers. What happens next? Do they just come in and start spraying chemicals everywhere?
Not at all. The first step is a really thorough inspection. They're technicians, they're highly trained. They'll come in and inspect your entire property, inside and out, looking for any signs of termite activity. They'll check any wooden structures, they'll inspect your foundation, they'll look for those mud tubes. They basically go over everything with a fine-tooth comb.
So it's more like a detective investigation than just a pest control visit, huh? And once they've figured out what's going on, what are the next steps?
Well, that's where the custom treatment plan comes in, which Critter Wranglers talks about. They don't just have a one-size-fits-all approach. They'll work with the homeowner to figure out the best strategy for their particular situation.
Right. It makes sense. I mean, every house is different. The severity of the infestation might be different, and every homeowner is going to have their own concerns. So it's really about finding a solution that works best for that specific situation. From what I understand, Critter Wranglers has a couple of main approaches to treatment, right? They've got methods for getting rid of the termites that are already there and ways to prevent them from coming back. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure, I can do that. So for active infestations, the goal is to eliminate the existing colonies. And there are a few ways to do that, but the most common involve using specialized chemicals, they call them termiticides, that are designed to kill termites. And then, of course, there's the preventative side, which is all about setting up defenses to keep termites from getting into your house in the first place.
Okay, and I know Critter Wranglers specifically mentions bait stations and liquid barriers as preventative measures. Can you break those down a little bit more for our listeners? What exactly are they and how do they work?
Of course. So bait stations, they're basically these small containers that they place strategically around the perimeter of your house, usually in the soil. And inside these stations, there's a material that termites find really attractive. It's like a food source for them. But here's the clever part. These baits often contain slow-acting poisons or insect growth regulators. So the termites feed on the bait, and then they unknowingly carry it back to their colony where they share it with the other termites. And eventually, this leads to the collapse of the entire colony, including the queen.
Wow, that's pretty ingenious using their own social behavior against them. And what about the liquid barriers?
Yeah, so liquid barriers are a bit more straightforward. Basically, they create a chemical barrier around your house that termites can't cross. They inject a termiticide, which is a chemical that kills or repels termites, into the soil around the foundation of your house. And this creates a treated zone that essentially acts like a protective shield. So if termites try to get through, they either die from the termiticide or they're repelled by it, and they can't reach the wood in your house.
So it's like a two-pronged attack. You've got the bait stations working from the inside out, and the liquid barriers creating a protective barrier around the outside. Sounds like a pretty comprehensive approach. But is that it? Do they just treat your house and then never come back?
No, that's definitely not the end of it. Ongoing monitoring is actually a really crucial part of termite control. Termites are constantly out there looking for new food sources, and even the best treatments can break down over time. So Critter Wranglers really emphasizes the importance of regular inspections. They'll come back periodically to check for any signs of new activity and make sure that the treatments are still working effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah.
mean, you wouldn't just get your car fixed and then never take it in for maintenance again, would you?
Hmm.
It's the same principle with termite control, right?
Yeah.
You've got to stay on top of it to make sure that your house stays protected. Now, let's say you live in the Knoxville area and you're thinking, okay, this all sounds good, but do they even service my area? Well, I can tell you that based on the info we have, Critter Wranglers covers a pretty wide area. They serve the greater Knoxville area, including places like Farragut, Oak Ridge, Powell, and a bunch of other surrounding areas. So chances are, if you're in the Knoxville area, they can help you out.
Yeah, they definitely seem to have a good reach across the region. And one thing I want to emphasize, because Critter Wranglers is really upfront about this, is the urgency of dealing with termites. They point out that if you've got an infestation, serious damage can happen in a matter of weeks if you don't take care of it. So the takeaway here is, don't wait. If you think you might have a termite problem, even if you're just a little suspicious, call a professional right away. It's much better to be safe than sorry.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not just about the potential costs of repairs either, right? It's about the safety of your home. Termites can weaken the structural integrity of your house, which can be a serious hazard, especially if you live in an area prone to things like earthquakes or strong winds. So yeah, taking care of a termite problem quickly can really save you a lot of headaches down the line. Now, while we don't have their specific contact info in front of us right now, it's clear that Critter Wranglers want you to reach out to them directly for any termite problems you might have in the Knoxville area. They position themselves as the experts, and from everything we've seen, they definitely seem to know what they're talking about.
Yeah. They do present themselves as the go-to folks for termite control in the Knoxville area. And when you look at the information they provide, the services they offer, and the areas they cover, it's hard to argue with that. They clearly have a deep understanding of the challenges specific to our region.
One thing I also noticed is that Critter Wranglers has gotten some really positive feedback from their customers. We've seen comments like, keeping my ants away, outstanding service, top-notch, and great guys, very knowledgeable and capable. And even though some of these might be for general pest control services, it still gives you a good sense of their dedication to customer satisfaction. It's clear that they take pride in their work and that they're really committed to helping homeowners. Actually, they were even named the best pest control company in Knoxville by Knox Stars for 5 years in a row, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that kind of consistent recognition year after year really speaks volumes. It shows that they're consistently delivering high-quality service and that their customers are happy with the results.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into termites, what's the main message you want our listeners in Knoxville to take away?
Well, I think the biggest thing to remember is that subterranean termites, they're a real threat to homes in Knoxville, and they have the potential to cause some serious damage if they're not dealt with. DIY methods, they're usually not enough, and the longer you wait to address a termite problem, the worse it's going to get. So if you're even the slightest bit concerned, call a professional.
Absolutely. And critter wranglers, they're a great option to consider. They offer a full range of services from inspections to customized treatment plans. They even offer preventative measures like those bait stations and liquid barriers we talked about.
Yeah.
And most importantly, they emphasize ongoing monitoring to make sure your home stays protected long term.
Precisely. Ignoring the potential for termites is a risk you really don't want to take. It's your home, it's probably your biggest investment, so it makes sense to protect it.
It's funny how we often get so focused on the obvious problems around the house, like a leaky faucet or a crack in the wall, but we sometimes forget about the hidden threats, like termites, that can be just as damaging, if not more so. So I think the real takeaway here is to be proactive. Think about those unseen challenges that might be lurking beneath the surface, and take steps to safeguard your home against them. It's definitely something we're thinking about, isn't it?
It is. Being a homeowner, it's not just about fixing what's broken, it's also about preventing problems before they even start.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.